everyone, and welcome to another Rewind Reviews recommendation. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at a TV series that was a big part of my mid-teenage years, and that is Smallville. Broadcast on the CW network from 2001 to 2011 and based on the DC comic book characters, Smallville follows the younger years of Clark Kent as he discovers his powers, his heritage, and his destiny as the one and only Superman. Developed by Alfred Gough and Miles Millar, the series stars the likes of Tom Welling, Michael Rosenbaum, Kristen Krug, Erica Durrance, Alison Mack, John Glover, Annette O'Toole, John Schneider, Justin Hartley, Sam Jones III, Cassidy Freeman, Laura Vandervoort, and many, many more. This is another one of those shows that I've been really wanting to talk about on this channel for quite some time now, and I figured, new Superman movie out? That seems like a pretty good excuse. So let's talk Smallville. I was going to say Talkville, but that's taken. So, my history with the show. Where do I begin? I was a bit too young to see this when it first started airing. I came into this around about the end of season 8, and I had no idea what was going on. I remember seeing a lot of the promos and trailers and things like that when this show was being broadcast on E4 over here in the UK, and every time I went to the shops I would constantly see the box sets everywhere, but for some reason I just didn't watch it. I think because at the time I wasn't really aware of what it was or the connection that it had to Superman. I mean, I saw the poster for season 1 with Clark in the cornfield with a giant red S painted on his chest, and I do remember saying to my parents that it did look like a Superman thing. I think I had seen one or two of the Christopher Reeve movies when I was quite young, but I wasn't really familiar with the name Smallville. And I don't know what it was that got me to want to see this series, I just did. As I said, I came into this towards the end of season 8, I think it actually was the season finale that I saw first. There was also random episodes getting repeated throughout the day, but because the episodes were getting repeated in a random order, I wasn't able to properly follow it. But then, season 9 began and I properly started watching it and getting into it. I went back to the shops, I bought season 1 and 2, and I was watching them simultaneously with season 9. So I really felt the contrast of how much this show had changed. This show had everything I needed and wanted. I was just the right age when I started watching it. It had action, it had comedy, it had drama, amazing characters, superheroes doing their thing, and some sexy stuff that wouldn't at all fly today. Yes, I am human, and it gave me my education in both Superman and the wider DC universe. This show was basically Superman 101 for me. At that point in time, I did know the basic stuff like where he comes from, his powers, Lois Lane, Kryptonite, Lex Luthor, Zod, things like that. But this show helped me to understand the character and why it is that he does what he does. It gave me a better understanding of the Superman lore, like what the Phantom Zone is and how his powers work. And it introduced me to so many more of Superman's villains outside of just Lex and Zod, like Metallo, like Bizarro, Doomsday, Darkseid, Brainiac, Silver Banshee, Toyman, and even Mr. Mixie Pritstick, whose name I still can't pronounce. It got me to genuinely love and care about this universe, not just Superman, and made me want to find out more about DC superheroes. This may be a Superman-focused show, but even so, the amount of cameos from some huge DC Comics characters is impressive, and it introduced me to some of my favourites. This introduced a version of The Flash who for some reason they decided to call Impulse. They also had Aquaman, Cyborg, Booster Gold, Blue Beetle, the Wonder Twins, Black Canary, Martian Manhunter pops up now and again. This even has members of the Justice Society like Stargirl, Hawkman, Alan Scott, Dr. Fate, and even Zatanna. This also made Green Arrow a bigger name too, and directly led to the creation of the Arrow TV series on the CW. It's not connected to this, just so you know, but this is where the idea for a Green Arrow TV show came from, and thus kickstarted the Arrowverse. And all because Smallville wasn't allowed to use Batman or Wonder Woman. Yeah, Warner Brothers have this really weird thing of blocking characters from appearing on both the big and small screen at the same time. Apparently they don't want the audiences to get confused. The Dark Knight trilogy was in development, and that's what stopped them from featuring Batman, and a Wonder Woman series starring Adrian Palicki was in development too, which never went past a pilot episode. Same happened with Aquaman as well, and Justin Hartley, who plays Green Arrow in Smallville, was originally cast as him, and now Smallville's Aquaman, Alan Ritchson, is the fan favourite to play Batman. And I've got to say, I have seen him in other things like Reacher, and I don't think that he would be a bad choice. Anyway, but yes, in spite of all those appearances and cameos, this is first and foremost a Superman story. It's a 10-season TV series that follows a young Clark Kent as he grows up in the small farm town of Smallville, and over the course of the show, Clark begins to learn about who he is, developing new abilities and superpowers like heat and X-ray vision. He uncovers his Kryptonian heritage and has to come to terms with the fact that he isn't either human or a meteor freak, and everything he does, every save, love and loss, all leads him to eventually fulfilling his destiny as the one and only Superman. In total, there are 217 episodes in this series, 219 if you split the two-parters in half, and each episode is between 40 to 45 minutes long. I won't lie, this is a long show that maybe didn't need so many episodes, but even so, it does mean that they are able to do a lot more with the characters. Like when Clark unlocks a new power, they usually dedicate a whole episode to him just learning how to use it and when it might come in handy. I'll admit, Heat Vision came as a shock. I can't lie, this is a very lusty show at times. Anyway, Smallville is a very episodic show, normally following a villain of the week type formula, especially in the earlier seasons. But from season 4 onwards, each season has an overarching story that unfolds over 22 episodes. This includes things like a witchy quest for a trio of Kryptonian stones, recapturing Phantom Zone escapees, the Supergirl story, the introduction of Doomsday, and the slow building rivalry between Clark and General Zod. Not every episode is great, I can't lie, it does have the odd clunker here and there, like one episode involving a sorority house that's been overrun by vampires, which unanimously nobody in the fanbase likes. Carrie Fisher's in that episode though. It is a long series, it can drag at times, and there is definitely some repetitiveness, especially in the earlier seasons, where almost every single villain that gets introduced is affected by kryptonite in some way. Hence why Chloe Sullivan refers to them all as meteor freaks. But I would honestly say that the majority of the episodes in this show are pretty good. There's even one episode where Clark helps Santa Claus. That did feel a bit random, but don't forget, Santa is actually a character that does appear in DC Comics. I'm not joking. Plus, there's a lot of creativity when it comes to how kryptonite is used throughout the show. Like, there's some characters who use it as tattoos, and that allows them to go through walls. And there's even an episode where kryptonite affects the crops that are used in a diet drink that not only helps someone lose weight, it gives them a taste for human meat. And that person is played by Amy Adams. They get up to all sorts with kryptonite in this. Plus, they also introduce several other forms of kryptonite outside of the usual green that all affect Clark in different ways. There's red, blue, gold, there's a dust form at one point, and even silver, which makes him go paranoid. And whenever red kryptonite is used, you are in for a treat. There are some really good episodes in this show and a lot of variety as well. And I can't deny how each season builds up and how it all culminates in each season finale. It's really satisfying. Even the controversial season 10 finale. Those episodes are usually some of the best in the show, and they feature some pretty jaw-dropping cliffhangers. I will say, I do side with the majority of the fanbase when I say that there is one very big aspect of the finale of the entire series that is disappointing, especially when you consider what the entire story has been building up to. But I've got to say, the final shot of the final episode is the perfect note to end on. But I do feel like they could have done a bit more. Anyway, none of this would matter if we didn't care about the characters, and that is one of the strongest elements of this show. Yes, it may be a bit soapy at times, and characters may make a decision or two that may seem a little bit off. But that said, the main characters that we follow throughout the show are extremely good and very well acted. Obviously, leading the show as Clark Kent is Tom Welling, and he's the only actor to appear in every single episode. Now, personally, I wouldn't say that he was my favourite actor to play Superman, but he was the one that got me to properly care about the character and empathise with him in a way that I hadn't before. I genuinely love this version of Clark though, don't get me wrong, I really love this interpretation, and it does a brilliant job of being able to balance the sort of angsty teenage stuff that you normally see in a soap opera, and his compassion that you see later on as Superman. This is a Clark that is figuring things out whilst also going through all the usual teenage high school drama. I love how we see him evolve and mature over the show, with more echoes of the man he is destined to be starting to shine through. And with the amount of stories this show tells, it gives Tom Welling so many opportunities to flex his acting abilities. And he is honestly brilliant, especially whenever Clark is on Red K. This understands that even though Clark is Kal-El, he's from another world, for all intents and purposes, he is still human, or at least he still acts human. It's something that a lot of writers and a supposed group of certain fans do tend to struggle with. And I think this show nails it, with Tom Welling delivering a fantastic performance. I would have liked him to have worn his glasses a little bit more though, and the suit. Anyway, there's one character in this that I have almost zero complaints with, and that is Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor. I doubt anyone who has watched this show will disagree with me when I say that this version of Lex Luthor is easily the best live action version of Lex that we have ever had, and it's all down to a flawless performance from Rosenbaum and the writing for him. But after seeing Superman 2025, I think he's got some competition. Lex is one of the most complex characters in the show and one of the main focal points, with his journey playing out juxtaposed to Clark, starting off as a friend wanting to do good and make up for his father's mistakes, but slowly growing bitter and jealous and evolving into the evil supervillain that we know him to be. Not every decision they make with him lands, admittedly, but that's more later on. The earlier seasons, Lex is genuinely fantastic and easy to empathise with, despite not always agreeing with his actions. Seeing the contrast between Lex and Clark's upbringing really helps drive home their differences and highlights how that impacts their future. Clark is surrounded by friends and a warm, loving family. Lex isn't. In fact, Lex's relationship with his father is so strained that you may be surprised how it unfolds. Those scenes between Rosenbaum's Lex and John Glover as Lionel Luthor are acting powerhouses. They are so good. How Lex Luthor is depicted in this show is a how-to on bringing Lex Luthor to life in live action. And I was so happy seeing that Nicholas Hoult actually cited this version of Lex as an influence on his own. And that's also the case when it comes to Rachel Brosnahan and her version of Lois Lane. Lois Lane in Smallville is played by the incredible Erica Durance. And after her introduction in season 4, she became my favourite Lois. Erica's Lois is a feisty, sarcastic, funny and sexy go-getter that really makes her presence felt when she arrives. And even though it takes a while for her and Clark to get together, the chemistry between them is undeniable. You really do buy into the relationship that these two have at every stage of their lives. I love this version of Lois, and she really does inject a lot of energy into the show. But as I said, she gets introduced in season 4, which is towards the end of Clark's high school days. The main love interest of this show is a character called Lana Lang, and she's played by Kristen Kruk. Once again, performance-wise, Kristen is amazing, and she does add a lot of depth to a character that isn't really the most important in the grand scheme of things. But she is likeable, especially early on. She is a good character, and you do empathise with her struggles. I do feel her story goes on a bit too long though, and I'm not a huge fan of how it wraps up with her, despite it being genuinely heartbreaking. I have seen an argument online saying that her story arc in season 8 is meant to highlight how Clark has moved on with his life, and she doesn't really fit into it anymore. But in my opinion, I don't think that it's executed as well as it could have been, or at least it's not executed in a way that really emphasises that. But aside from that, she is decent, and I do think that Kristen does do some excellent work. Now, unfortunately, I can't really do this video without mentioning Alison Mack at some point. She plays a character called Chloe Sullivan, who is an original creation for this show and one of the more prominent characters. I'd rather not get into what's happened with her, but I do understand that there are quite a few people that do struggle to separate the art from the artist. And I do understand that people who do struggle with that can feel a little bit alienated from this series. And that's completely fair. So as for Chloe as a character, I thought that she was really good and goes on one of the best transformations out of the rest of the ensemble. There is definitely some decisions that don't quite work, but I do love how she develops and changes as time goes on. And I can't knock Alison's performance either. She was great overall. This is a show that does have some great casting choices and performances overall, even with the sheer volume of characters. Jonathan and Martha Kent played amazingly by John Schneider and former Lois Lane actress Annette O'Toole, who both provide genuine warmth and a believability to Clark's moral compass. Lionel Luthor played by John Glover, who is easily one of the best and most manipulative villains in the show, but the way he changes over the course of the show is pretty interesting. A lot of the big villains are really well done, with some great performances from people like Sam Witwer, Callum Blue and James Masters. They are significantly toned down compared to their comic counterparts, but when it comes to this continuity to Smallville, I don't think they're bad adaptations, and I would say, especially within context of the story, they do work well. Plus, we also have a number of side characters with varying levels of impact, some of which stay on as regulars after they're introduced. Standouts include Pete Ross, played by Sam Jones III, Tess Mercer, played by Cassidy Freeman, Sarah Carter as Alicia Baker, Jimmy Olsen, played by Aaron Ashmore. Aaron Ashmore's twin brother Sean, who most people will know as Iceman from the X-Men movies, actually makes a few appearances in the earlier seasons. Yet nobody on the show acknowledges that they look alike. I will admit the Jimmy Olsen twist in this show makes absolutely no sense. Trust me, you'll understand when you see it. Anyway, there's also Eric Johnson as Whitney Fordman, Alessandro Giuliani as Dr. Emil Hamilton, Terence Stamp as the voice of Jor-El, with the late Julian Sands taking over in the later seasons. Former Supergirl actress Helen Slater also appears as Lara, and yes, Supergirl herself does make her presence felt in the later half of the show with a great performance from Laura Vandervoort. I actually got to meet her a couple of years ago at a Comic-Con event, and she was absolutely lovely, and I made 15-year-old me very happy. Yeah, I had a bit of a thing for her. Moving on, plus, as I said earlier, we also get a brilliant adaptation of Green Arrow played by Justin Hartley. As much as I like Stephen Amell's version of Green Arrow, I can't deny that Justin's version is my favourite. To me, his attitude and the way that he's portrayed feels a lot more comic accurate. Throughout this show, there are some excellent performances and guest stars, and I will say that these versions of these characters are pretty memorable, and arguably some of the best, especially from the legends themselves, Margot Kidder and Christopher Reeve, who both have brief but very significant appearances. And I'll tell you what else was memorable, and I don't think that anyone who's watched this show will disagree with me, and that's the music. Now, I'm not talking about the actual score from Mark Snow and Louis Febvre, which is fine, by the way. No, I'm talking about the songs. This show is like a jukebox of late 90s, early 2000s pop, rock, punk, country, heavy metal. You name it, it is right up my street. Believe me, for the first 4 or 5 seasons, almost every episode had several songs that I would be searching up afterwards. I actually didn't know this until quite recently, but the music supervisor that worked on Smallville was a woman called Alexandra Patsavas, and she has actually served as the music supervisor for several big projects over the years, including the OC, Grey's Anatomy, Gossip Girl, Mad Men, and even the Twilight Saga. That was pretty cool finding that out. She knows her stuff. Some of the songs that get featured throughout this series actually went on to become some of my favourites, and the songs that get featured range from artists like Sum 41, Avril Lavigne, Weezer, Stained, through to Switchfoot, Vast, Chevelle, Von Ray, Jimmy Eats World, Apocalyptica, Sarah Bareilles. So many you will definitely know, and they are all used perfectly, especially when it comes to some sequences involving Lex. And I've got to admit, that prison riot sequence in season 4 with Pain playing in the background is so memorable. And of course the main theme song, and that's a song called Save Me by Remy Zero. That song is burned into my brain. Somebody save me. I promised myself I wouldn't murder that song. I'm so sorry. Hi, I'm Tone Deaf. It may not be the best Superman theme, but it is one of the most memorable, and it's ridiculously hard not to think of either Superman or this show anytime I hear it. And I actually really appreciated that they actually did use it during the Elseworlds crossover in the Arrowverse. Now admittedly it's a different interpretation of Clark and Lois, but even so, it just brought all that nostalgia back. Even though it wasn't created exclusively for this show, it is a great theme song. It's a great song for a great show. Overall, while not a perfect show, it is a great time and a must-watch for any budding or veteran Superman fan. It can be a little dated in some areas. The special effects are a bit mixed and don't quite hold up too well. Plus, there is a lot of shall we say gratuitous sex appeal that some people won't be too happy with. The stories can drag a bit, it is quite a long show and does require some commitment. At times it can feel more like something from a soap opera, and it doesn't always go in directions that you hope it would, with some characters occasionally acting a little bit odd. And the show's code of no flights, no tights will definitely garner some complaints. But that said, the characters, the performances, the majority of the stories, how it matures over time, the variety of episodes, the music and the sheer ambition of it are excellent. The legacy of this show cannot be overstated. It was the first DC superhero show on the CW network, introduced a whole generation to these characters, helped pave the way for the Arrowverse, and managed to remain one of the best live-action DC Comics adaptations for TV. I won't lie though, this show might not be for everyone. Some will most likely find it too cheesy, too long or slow, too soap-like, and if that's the case, then maybe something like Arrow or Gotham would be more up your street. But for me, as a fan of this character, as a fan of the DC universe, I think this is a great show and definitely worth checking out. I would highly recommend it. Well, that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video, so if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy this content, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button. If you have seen Smallville, let me know down in the comments what you think about it, what your favourite episode is, season or song. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future rewind reviews or recommendations you would like to see me do in the future, let me know down below. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you in the next video. See you guys.